Hello, everybody. My name is Luke Thomas. This is the Promotional Malpractice Live Chat, episode, I think, 127. The day is Wednesday, February 25th. We are almost in March. Can you believe that? Today on the docket, we're going to have, Ronda Rousey discussion, Rousey versus Zingano. We will have, obviously, a fair amount of talk about Josh Neer. I just put an article about it. That, of course, like everything I do, seems to be polarizing. Not intentionally, but whatever. So there's that as well. There's Invicta this weekend. There's Bellator this weekend. So a very, very busy weekend. As you can see, we are back to the broom closet, but I actually don't mind it because it's kind of solitary. The light doesn't mess with it. The light's not great in here, but it's all right. A couple of notes, if you will. Note all the comments that I'll be looking at mostly will either be on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas, but predominantly on MMAfighting.com. There's, of course, a post dedicated to that as well. If you would be so kind, whenever you're watching this, whether it's live right now or at some point down the line, please share it. Give it a share on SoundCloud, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Pinterest, on Google+, whatever it is that you use, any form of sharing and helping to spread the word on mixedmartialarts.com, on Reddit, whatever you guys can do. Of course, that's insuredog.net. That's greatly appreciated. And, of course, you may email me if you so choose at luke.thomas@sbnation.com. Again, I'm going to keep saying this until people listen, though. I appreciate all your emails, and I'm going to get back to some this week, but a lot of you guys are sending me emails that are like these super long, detailed questions. Guys, in the course of my day, I do not have time to answer those. I need things that are like tips of information or short questions or basic inquiries. Anything that's super long and detailed, it's a high likelihood I'm not going to be able a chance to get to it. But neither here nor there. Let's kick off the chat. We should have, as you can see, let me hold it up. We got a good microphone today. Camera's looking pretty good. I got some gross diet soda, which I'm going to crack open, and we shall begin. All right. First question up on the show. All right, Brendan Schaub hinted on the Joe Rogan podcast that he could make 205 pounds and may go to light heavyweight. Do you agree with him doing that? And if so, who would you choose for him to fight first at light heavyweight? P.S. Why do you not like John Wick? The movie was awesome. Well, first of all, they killed a dog in John Wick. And I just can't stand seeing violence against animals, in particular dogs. Whether or not that makes sense, I don't present it to you that it does. I'm just telling you how I feel. But John Wick sucked because it's not a good movie. It's a vehicle for gratuitous violence. Now, that gratuitous violence was awesome, but it's not a movie. There's no story there. It's just a bare bones apparatus, I guess, just so you can plug in, things that would, get people like me to cheer. But it's not as a movie. It's an empty suit. The emperor has no clothes. Okay, but back to Brendan Schaub. I'm not saying don't see it. I mean, for folks who don't know why I'm mentioning John Wick or why this person's asking about it, John Wick is a bad movie, but the action scenes are great. And if you haven't seen John Wick, you could, I think, watch it for like $5 on YouTube or, on demand or whatever. The MMA, or I should say the fight scenes, oftentimes in MMA or movies where they use MMA in their fight scenes, it's like real hokey. Like someone is doing something that just even in MMA wouldn't work. In this one, it's not that way at all. Like they're using some judo throws or some submissions they use, but they make it work in a much more realistic way. So it's actually kind of cool how they use MMA. So I'll give, in that sense, it's really cool. But, there's no movie there. You're just watching people get killed. As for Brendan Schaub, I mean, look, here's the question. So, look, I wouldn't, if he's trying to explore all of his career options, I think on that level, that's okay. I've seen Brendan Schaub in person. He's a big guy, so I think he'd be a really big light heavyweight if he can make it. The question is, what would he be adding and what would he be subtracting? He has, he's a big size heavyweight, but not a huge heavyweight. So part of his advantages at heavyweight are that he doesn't get muscled around, but he has a little bit of speed. I think historically some of his benefits against some of the guys he was able to defeat, he was shown to have more explosive movement. I think some of that's waned just with age. So the question is, what does he bring into light heavyweight that would change? Would he really pick up speed? Would he really have a dynamic advantage there? Maybe. I mean, maybe losing all that weight would really add that to him. Would he be able to retain his strength? I wonder that as well. And then the other question is, and that's really important because as you climb the ranks in light heavyweight, you can say that the division's weak, but it's filled with a lot of wrestlers. You know, there's your Bader up there. There's your Davis up there. There's your Cormier up there. Gustafsson is not a wrestler, but I think we can all say that Gustafsson is a pretty polished striker, can sit behind a jab. Anthony Johnson's out there as well too. So, you know, I would have some questions about what is realistically possible with a move up. I wouldn't discount it, but whenever you see something like this, just ask yourself, what would he realistically be gaining and what would he realistically be giving up? Again, why did Fedor, who is basically a middleweight, compete at heavyweight? Well, because he had a tremendous speed advantage. He did get muscled around, I think, more than people remember, but the mobility that he enjoyed at that weight really enabled him to have, in his prime, just really dynamic movement. And he also had big power, you know. So that's what the advantage was. I don't think that Schaub is experiencing something quite. I don't think he's a light heavyweight just competing up. He's now a true heavyweight trying to get down a weight class. You know, we'll see how that goes. I wonder about the speed, though. I mean, that's something that, not saying he's like crazy faster than all the other heavyweights, but it's something that's sort of, kind of, a little bit in his back pocket. And against, again, not against the upper tier, but against some of the guys he's able to defeat, he showed a relative kind of advantage, athletic advantage. I don't know that would translate against guys he could or couldn't beat down a weight class. All right. Sunday night fights. Do you think, given the rating success of the UFC's last two Sunday night fights on Fox Sports 1, McGregor versus Seaver and Bigfoot versus Mir, there was one before that. It was Hendo versus Shogun, too. There is any chance the UFC will look to make Sundays for Fox Sports 1 fight nights a more permanent fixture? I realize the great ratings for McGregor versus Seaver probably had much more to do with McGregor himself rather than the fight being on a Sunday. But I was surprised at just how well Bigfoot Mir had done, given it was a card that did not contain a lot of big names outside of the main event. Yeah, I mean, look, I think they're going to do Sundays to the extent that it makes sense. One, I don't think it's their preference. I do think that, for one, their broadcast partners, even if the ratings might be higher on Sunday, they're going to want to have marquee content on Saturday night. It's going to be important for them. And, you know, look, at some nights they're going to have baseball, and maybe some nights they're going to have college football or whatever the case may be. And rather than going to Fox Sports 2, it makes sense to move to Sundays on Fox Sports 1. But there's going to be all kinds of conflicts, particularly when football season comes around. And maybe Europeans don't quite respect it, but the NFL is God here. Going against that is just a very bad idea, right? So that won't work for that portion of the calendar. Again, Fox is going to want to have that Saturday night slot filled. And much of what UFC does is an attempt to fulfill their contract requirements about what they owe their broadcast partners. So there's that as well. But I do think, to your point, now you have 3 events on Sunday night that all did well in the ratings. You have the 2 you mentioned, and of course the Shogun Hendo 2 rematch. Look, I think to the extent possible, they're going to try and maybe explore a little bit on Sunday nights. Also, it has to make sense in terms of the local place where they're having these fights. Brazil can be tough for the Wednesday fight, for example, so they because of soccer, so they may want to do, you know, either Saturday or Sunday nights there. But you get the idea. So there's all those factors that have to play in. Does it make sense for the actual city that they're in? Does it make sense for their broadcast partners? Does it make sense for the rest of the sporting ecosystem that's out there in terms of competition? But if you can solve all of those problems and you want to experiment a little bit, I think, to your point, it's been shown there's a little bit extra volume maybe of viewers either on or at least willing to give UFC a shot on a Sunday night. There's no doubt about it. And, of course, you know, they've been smart about who they've used. I mean, Mir versus Bigfoot isn't necessarily the most marquee names they can use, but Mir's been a long-time guy in the UFC. He's got some brand visibility there, and folks are at least willing to give him a shot. Previously, they've used, as you mentioned, McGregor, and then before that, Hendo and Shogun. So they've definitely used some names that have been valuable to them. It'd be a little more interesting to see what a Swanson versus Stevens would have done, right? All right. If Jake Ellenberger loses at 184, it will be 4 losses in a row. Do you think the UFC will cut him or keep him to prevent him going to Bellator? Will Bellator be interested in him? Bellator might be interested in him. He's a little bit different than, I think we talked previously about the Phil Davis case. I think Ellenberger against the right opponent is certainly an action fighter. So he has that going for him. The one thing that I would want to know is they may not cut him because, I don't know. I just feel like the rules about who they cut now have been dramatically shifted. Before it was like 3 and you're out no matter what. And now I don't feel like it's that way. Now it's like 4. Can we manage 5 if you take time off kind of thing? But Jake Ellenberger has been one of these guys, and I know a lot of fighters say it, but he has been really kind of very adamant about it in a way that's a little more particular and a little more regular and a little more vocal. Namely, if he's not really in this to compete for a title, it's not clear what business he has here. That's not me putting that on him. That's him repeating that back. I am simply articulating what he has said on a number of occasions, both to me and to many other reporters who have done interviews with him. Now, what that means in terms of how he defines whether he's competing for a title or not, well, it's, to your question, hard to tell. But one wonders after 4 in a row if he might decide altogether that this is not really a place for me to, this is not an occupation I wish to continue in. I don't know, I'm not saying that, if he loses 4 in a row, he'll retire. I can't say that with any certainty. What I can say with certainty is he is one of the few guys who has been really, really vocal about not wanting to stick around if there wasn't a title picture in his future. And with 4 losses in a row, a title picture being in your future, and I believe he's in his 30s now. Let me just before I just say that, let me just make sure. Jake Ellenberger is 29, so not quite. So it's difficult now. We're living in a new world. But just keep that in mind. That has been something he has said on a number of occasions, more than other fighters have said. That's really kind of stuck with me. He seemed to be very serious about that claim. So I don't know. I don't know what UFC might do. We have a new world about who UFC will cut on what circumstances and when. And we haven't quite figured it out yet. Guys like Neer and Bigfoot losing 4 in a row. I mean, these are things that were like antithetical to the UFC standard of excellence previously. But now that you have these competitors who can make do with, guys who can't ordinarily hack it in UFC, it changes the dynamic completely. And we haven't quite mapped out what the rules are yet. All right, so let's get to it. Josh Neer, gym hero or aspiring criminal? So I wrote about this, and like I said, it seems like everything I do is polarizing for one reason or another. Let me make a quick note about the writing that I do. I don't expect it to appeal to everybody, and I don't write what I write. First of all, I'm out of practice because I just don't write enough. It's my fault. I should write more, and so I always feel like I'm a little bit rusty. It's a little bit hard for me to articulate myself and then edit down. So I think in a year's time, my plan for 2015 is to really write a lot and then get better, because I certainly feel like I need to. But that aside, there's this claim that I'm always like writing to like pretend I'm doing something other than what I'm doing. Like, oh, you're trying to sound this way or trying to sound. No, I am not. I like to write the way it is I like to read, right? That's it. And I don't expect everyone to like it. I don't expect everyone to hate it. But just so it's clear, if you don't like the way I write, it's fine. If you love the way I write, I appreciate it. I've gotten some great comments too. So I just want to point out, though, that like whatever you think about it, I don't write for the audience. I write for myself, understanding that it still has to be palatable to the audience on some level. But let me just make that clear. I write to make a point, yes, but I don't write being like, well, I need to make sure I write at a standard that the majority of the audience is going to get. I'm never, ever going to do that. Okay. As for Josh Neer, is he a gym hero or an aspiring criminal? So here is the interesting part about Josh Neer, and I made this point. It's called Understanding Josh Neer, or What It Means to Be a Violent Sportsman. I don't think he's either. MMA is, and I separate MMA from the professional competition. There's a lot of different ways to understand this. First of all, like, what was this guy thinking? The guy who goes in there, because this is a situation where there is a lot of like quote unquote victim blaming, but it's not really clear that there's a victim here. I mean, there is and there isn't, you know. But the funny part to me about this whole thing was like a lot of people made the debate about whether or not there's a gym culture out there that does this, and they're right that there is. There absolutely is a gym culture that does it. Now, for example, the gym I'm at now, would we do something like that? No. As a matter of fact, we've had guys come in and try, and we just told them to please leave. Like, this is not what we're about. It's a gym that, you know, again, it doesn't produce a bunch of world-class MMA fighters, but that's the point. Like, there's lots of gyms that have MMA fighters that don't engage in this kind of thing. You know, it's just absolutely true. There are a lot that are, and historically there are a lot that have been. And Neer came from one, Militich, where, you know, I know it was funny to me. There was a lot of like discussion about, oh, Duke Rufus ran a gym that did this and ran a gym that did that. And no one really ever presented any evidence that what he did was materially different than anything that happened in Militich in their heyday. Seemed to me all very much birds of a feather flocking together. So there is this culture of using violence and like this jumping in borderline gang initiation to either put someone through a trial by fire to initiate them, or to send a message to someone who is acting out of line, or in this particular case, to take an outsider and to teach them a lesson. The violence is very much a teaching tool. It is very much, I mentioned it before, fighting is the adjudication of dispute through physical means. That's what it is, right? On the street, when two guys are fighting, they have a dispute and they're going to settle it by physically trying to dominate the other guy. That's what that, and hurt the other guy. That's what that is, okay? So it's true that there's a part of this gym culture. It's not universal, but it exists, and I wouldn't call it rare. I wouldn't call it common, but I wouldn't call it rare either. So that's part of it, right? I think the other part is, you know, and I mentioned this as well, like if you see a situation where people need help, right? Both immediate, let's say there's a burning building and you see kids, what do these situations ask of you? In that particular case, it would ask you of courage. If you see some, you know, starving children in Haiti after the earthquake, it calls upon your compassion and your generosity and your humanity to want to help other people. Fighting does the exact opposite. Fighting calls upon you to ignore their humanity. Fighting calls upon you to exact physical demolition. It calls upon you the willingness to cause pain and suffering to another person. And it's funny to me that a lot of fans don't seem to quite understand that. And that mixed martial arts is a sport. Okay, and I'll get to this in just a second. It is a sport, but fighting is something we do independent of it. Mixed martial arts is just fighting for sport. This is not, as much as we want to tell people this, it's more of a difference in degree, not so much kind. I mean, it is different because it's regulated and there are rules. And so maybe in that sense, it's a difference in kind, but it's also, it feels like a bit of a difference in degree. This is my point. Mixed martial arts is like a contradiction in many ways. We are trying to divorce ourselves from the roots from which it applies, but I don't really know how possible that is ultimately. And this is a frank conversation I think the community has to have with itself. Look, there are guys like Uriah Faber who would never harm a fly outside of competition, you know, and you know, that's important to note. But there are a lot of guys who, you know, to be able to answer the call to violence is not an automatic thing. You cannot just take someone off the street and teach them how to do Muay Thai or Jiu-Jitsu or wrestle and then ultimately MMA and expect that to happen. I know we all have this delusion that like, oh, if called upon, I would protect this and I would fight that guy. And maybe some of you would, many of you would not. Most people cannot answer the call to violence. They can't. You don't have the constitution for it. And the truth is, unless you've really figured that out, unless you've gone through the process of trying to figure that out, you don't know the answer to it. Maybe you could. Maybe some of you could. I bet you many of you couldn't. You physically don't have it in you to ignore the humanity of another person in an attempt to cause physical pain and suffering to them. It's not an automatic thing. And if you think it is, you are completely wrong. Okay? So who is Josh Neer? First of all, this to me was so crazy that like, if this guy had gone into Faber's gym and tried this, would the same thing have happened to him? I mean, maybe they would have sparred with him. I know he was a big guy, but I'm just saying a guy who had similar ideas about things. Would they have gone and sparred with him? Maybe they would have, you know, beat the hell out of him, but they probably would have done what Josh Neer did. Josh Neer destroyed this kid, okay? And then filmed it and then shared it. He wanted to, he not only had, I mean, there wasn't a scintilla of remorse. On top of that, he wanted to show it to people. This is something he was proud of. Look at what I did, right? Okay, somebody who makes those kinds of calculations, it is, you have to understand like who they are. This is somebody who can answer the call to violence like that. Like that. There are not many people like that. There are not many people in MMA like that. But the funny part about it all, and this is what you have to understand, he had an incident in 2009, Josh Neer did, with DUI. Okay, but short of that, he has no history of arrest that I'm aware of. This isn't a guy who is a menace to society at all. In fact, he didn't go seeking trouble. Trouble sought him. MMA occupies a weird space. It is at once the violence of that you see, the unrestrained violence between two people trying to desperately hurt each other without any kind of rules or understanding or setup. And it is then put into place in professional competition. It is sanitized. MMA professional competition is a sanitized version of violence that we enjoy. There's rules. It's been athletically elevated. It's partly regulated in some ways, but there is another level of violence that is part of the family that many of these guys embrace that we don't get to see, but totally exists. I mean, just understand, he says he has 88 amateur fights and he has 50 pro fights. Okay. This is a guy who has caused tremendous pain and suffering to others, all under terms by which everyone was consenting adults, and probably in most cases, at least in 50 professional fights, regulated to some extent, right? This is not someone who deserves to be punished by the law in any circumstance whatsoever, but just understand mentally what that takes. The years and years and years of making that choice to do that to people, and then being surrounded in a culture that reinforces it and washes over you over and over and over and over again. It will warp your perspective about what justice and fairness and giving someone a lesson looks like. So to me, people are all saying, well, he should have known better. Who could argue with that? Why did he have those extra elbows? Why did he seemingly, I know the coach says otherwise, why did he soccer kick someone? These seem to be totally over the line to you and to me. To him, that seemed right in line with what's fair. And why wouldn't it be? From someone who can make the call to violence that easily, that regularly, and for such a prolonged period of time, is of course going to have what many of us view is a sadistic view of justice. It's not sadistic to him. And like I said, this guy is, I don't know if he's a model citizen, but he is not a threat to society in any way. Guy pays his bills and stays, for the most part, out of trouble. He has a DUI. That's the same thing as John Jones. I have friends who had DUIs. So you have to understand, you are at once Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and some folks only want to see one side of it. They don't want to see the other. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in. There is an element to it, is an undercurrent. The call to violence does not come without a change in who you are, or at least a magnification of it over time. You cannot make the decision to hurt another person that many times without it affecting your reasoning about what is and is not fair. And again, that will happen for everybody, and not all fighters, I think, necessarily feel that same way that Josh Neer did. I understand that too. There's a range of opinions on this. But to me, it was like, Josh Neer is called the dentist, and he didn't get that nickname because he fights cavities. He got that nickname because old boy will knuckle up quickly, fairly, and not in parking lots and under the rules of someone else that he engaged with. He's not some ferocious wild animal that deserves to be caged. I'm not saying that, but he can answer the call to violence without a hesitation. There are not many people built that way. And so to me, it's like, well, he went to an MMA fighter's gym. What was he expecting? He didn't just go to an MMA fighter's gym. He went to Josh Neer's gym. Go watch the Josh Neer fight with Drew Fickett and listen to what Joe Rogan says about Josh Neer. I haven't seen that fight in years, and I still remember what he said. Josh Neer is not a guy who's ever going to go away in a fight. You have to either knock him out or choke him out. That's it. He just doesn't give up. Now, I guess he got Kimura'd by Nick Diaz. But okay, that's Nick Diaz. But you know what I mean? This is a guy who, unless you remove his consciousness, is a Terminator. So you didn't just go to an MMA fighter's gym. You went to Josh Neer's. You went to a guy who earned the name through fighting of the dentist. That is a colossal mistake. Everyone's saying Luke. In fairness, his DUI was a felony hit and run, and he was charged with eluding police. Quite a bit different than Jones' DUI. Okay. Listen, I'm not saying he has a perfect record, but he doesn't have a record of fist fighting in public. He doesn't have a record of assault. He doesn't have a record of battery. He doesn't have a record of domestic violence. He doesn't have any of these things. He's not a perfect citizen, but who is? So, but this idea that he's like, oh, he's like, we can't trust him to live in society. No, you can't. You can't. Trouble went and sought him, and he responded. But I just want you to understand like what MMA is about. It is fighting for sport. It is restraint. It's the kind of violence that should exist. Because if you don't, you get other forms of it. But understand what the root motivation is and what it can also do to people. This idea that I can answer the call to violence. No, you cannot. Not all of you. Some of you could. And very few of you can do it as easily as Josh Neer. And if you do it as long as Josh Neer has done it, I think it really changes your perspective about what is sadism and what is appropriate justice. Someone's calling the room. I'm going to hang up on them. Let's imagine you bet 10 underdogs in a row and won $32 million. Well, I definitely didn't do that. Most important question, can we continue to get MMA analysts and live chats and MMA beat appearances? Or do you disappear to a mansion in Colombia and we never see you again? I suspect you'd never see me. Why not name and shame? Hi, Luke. Recently, it seems like a lot of fighters have come out and stated they have been either offered PEDs by other fighters or know of other fighters that are 100% on PEDs. Most recently, in a story that was on this site, Jake Ellenberger came out and said, I know for a fact I fought guys on PEDs. I've had guys tell me after the fight. I wouldn't say any names, but you can tell. Why do you think fighters are so hesitant to name names when it comes to PEDs? At the end of the day, these guys are potentially taking away opportunities from clean fighters by taking an easier route and cutting corners. What is the purpose in defending them? Why not name and shame? So for me, as media, I've told you this before, I can't do it without any evidence. It's simply not something I am willing to do. Have I heard rumors? 1,000 times. About 1,000 guys? Of course. But it's not something I can readily go forward and without any information. So that's one part. I think they feel a similar thing. I think that without direct, even if someone tells you that, you still would want to see evidence. You would have to see a teammate. That might be the other problem, right? Maybe he's saying, I've had guys come out and tell me, maybe that's code for I've had guys I've trained with, I've seen it. Do you really want to be a guy who is fairly or unfairly, and probably unfairly, viewed as a snitch? Do you really want to be that guy? There's a code of silence because people are trying to protect other people. And also there's this culture of, well, no excuses. Even if you lost to a guy on steroids, you don't say anything. And then obviously they don't buy that all the way, but they buy it enough to where they want to mention it. But then, hey, I'm not going to mention any names. So I think partly it's a combination of things. They hear things and they want to repeat it. Maybe people have told them that, but they don't have any direct evidence. Maybe it's a teammate they're trying to protect. Maybe they just have a perspective on the sport as being generally dirty and just, are just sort of at ease, or not at ease, but accept it for what it is. I think it's a lot of things. True or false? Mayweather versus Pacquiao will easily generate more revenue than what UFC did for all of 2014 combined. Bob Arum said this fight could do $400 million in total. I don't know if that's true, but I do want to say something. I had this guy on Twitter. This is funny, man. I had this guy on Twitter being like, listen, if you're an MMA fan and you don't care about Mayweather versus Pacquiao, there's nothing wrong with that. If you don't like boxing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're not going to watch, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you hate these two idiots, that's fine. There's really no answer. There's nothing you could say about that that's wrong. But understand that's your personal expectations or likes are completely irrelevant to what's actually happened. I had this guy on Twitter being like, it should have happened 5 years ago. He wrote non-event IMO, in my opinion. And I'm just thinking like that's literally what you would say on opposite day. I mean, it's the most important fight in a generation, if not two. And he goes, well, it's just for money. I'm like, it's actually to settle who's the most important or the best fighter of this generation. These are not things that were like up for debate. This is actually what this is. That it's also a moneymaker is true. But anyway, just folks understand if you don't like this stuff, okay, I get it. But if you're trying to undermine either the economic or sporting impact of this, you are wasting your time. I highly recommend you not do that. Michael Johnson. I've been very impressed with Michael Johnson in the last few fights. I see improvement in him every fight, and I don't think he has reached his ceiling. I agree. How good is Michael Johnson, and where would you put him in the division? He needs to fight someone. The Barboza fight was instructive because it wasn't that he was just able to stick to a game plan and walk this guy down and pretty close to dominate him. Barboza got off a few things here or there, but that was really Michael Johnson. There's a few things I think he needs to tighten up, but until we really see him fight the elite of the division, which I don't think – partly what's happening here is a function of surprise, that he is, as you mentioned, improving in such a way that it's like forcing us to reevaluate his ceiling and forcing us to reevaluate his place in the division. So we kind of have not figured that out yet. That's why I like the Ben Henderson fight. He's available. Maybe Ben doesn't want it because it's a step down, quote unquote, in a way. But I think it's really important to tell us exactly who Michael Johnson is and what his ceiling might be. But, this is a guy who lost to Reza Madadi, and I think that was just, I don't know what that performance was, if it was an off night or he's gotten a lot better since then, or a combination of the two, because I don't think Reza Madadi is that good. I don't think he's that bad. I don't think he's that good. But yeah, to your point, he is improving in such a way that he is forcing us to reevaluate things. Moreover, I mentioned like the ease with which he was able to walk this guy down. It reminded me, again, very, very different. Don't go crazy when I make the comparison, but it reminded me a little bit of, if you want to say Chris Weidman, Lyoto Machida, you can do that. It also reminded me of Fedor Krokop in a way. Again, not the same level of skill or anything like that, but just in the sense that one guy was able to take away such a dynamic and critical component of the other guy's skill set by a continued application of a game plan. He never wavered from it, never backed off from it, believed in it. There was such confidence in the way he executed it. So I definitely feel like there's another level he could hit, and I don't know how high it is, but I am willing to be convinced by his performances one way or the other. Frank Mir, what do you think of Frank's performance? How would you think he would match up against Arlovsky now? Arlovsky's takedown defense is good, so we'd have to strike with him. On that level, I worry a little bit. Arlovsky's a bit of a streaky striker. Sometimes he has big power. Sometimes he just sort of like wanders through a fight and doesn't really land anything of note. I don't know. I think it's a good fight to make because I'm not exactly sure what would happen with those two. I thought Mir looked good. I liked the way he was pulling with the jab, and I mentioned this in the Monday Morning Analyst. He was getting Bigfoot to go like this, and then the minute Bigfoot parried, he parried the jab. Then he came right back with the left hook, and that's what knocked him down. Great finishing ability. Those elbows, those are the same elbows Josh Neer was using on that guy. So vicious, vicious elbows. It's a fight I could entertain. It's a fight I could definitely entertain. I mean, both guys did well against Bigfoot. Arlovsky needs a fight. Mir, they trained together in some capacity, but I think Mir was not at Jackson's at his last camp. So to me, it's an issue of Mir won't be able to use his wrestling, which is something he's invested in the last few years, because I think whatever else you think of Arlovsky's takedown defense is really good. And not perfect, but really good. Good enough probably to thwart Mir's takedowns. But I wonder how Mir would do exchanging in the pocket. That, to me, is a bit of an X factor because he didn't really do that with Bigfoot very much. Bigfoot did a lot of like counter-striking and waiting. It wasn't, I mean, for the short fight that it was, he didn't offer a whole lot. So let's see. Trilogies. I was thinking about UFC trilogies the other day. It just so happened the ones I was thinking about, the fighter who won the second fight almost most likely would win the third. So Kane, JDS, Chuck Couture, Griffin, Ortiz, Sylvia and Arlovsky, GSP and Hughes. I was wondering if there's any particular reason that the winner of the second fight would also most likely go on to win the third fight, or is it just pure coincidence? I don't think it's pure coincidence. The question is, and it's the same with Chandler and Alvarez too, right? So in the first fight, it was Chandler surging and Alvarez sort of taking, this is what I think, taking in a challenger he wasn't prepared for. By the second fight, Alvarez was able to make adjustments of who he knew Chandler to be. Now, in the third fight, they're both able to make adjustments. But the key is you get a much cleaner look in the second fight at who these two are than you do in the first. provided that there's no injuries the guys carry in, or a bad weight cut or something. Assuming everything went normal for the most part, the second fight is a much better look at who is what and who is where. If you go back and look at the Chuck and Randy fight, Randy used a lot of wrestling, bouncing him off the cage. By the way, Randy's cage takedowns are great. Yes, sometimes he runs a guy into the fence, tries to wrestle him there, but a lot of what he does is run you into the fence to bounce you off and then pick you up and drop you. Passing guard, moving to mount on Couture, on Liddell. And so I think Liddell was caught off guard. He was caught surprised. There were ways in which that Couture had used footwork to cut certain angles to limit some of the punching power of Liddell. And Liddell was able to move in angles and in motions that kept the right distance and kept the right punches he needed to score, while also having his takedown defense short up. So the second fight was a much clearer indication of where they were if both guys had the right kind of preparation. And so the third fight is usually an extension of that second fight. It's not coincidence at all. Punishments for Silva, Diaz, and Lombard. The UFC spoke at their press conference last week how they would like to see athletic commissions give harsher punishments for drug test failures, and that they would support 2 and maybe even 4-year bans. Do you think there's any chance the UFC would push for the Nevada Athletic Commission to invoke these longer suspensions for Anderson, Diaz, Lombard in order to send a message to the rest of the fighters? No, not yet. I think that they want to have a plan in place that they can shop at a later date and then start from that moment on. I think this period between now and July is very much your open period, your whatever is currently in place. We'll just keep that as it is, and it'll be a brand new day when that's ready. And until that's ready, I don't think they're really going to do that. So no, I don't suspect they're going to retroactively try and do these things about sending a message. Moreover, as someone points out here, giving a 2-year ban to Diaz, I think to me would be fairly insane. I completely agree. True or false? Brown gets a shot at Kane for the title. I'll say true. Zingano will fight for a decision. False. UFC 187 main card stays intact. I'm just going to say true as a measure of, knocking on wood. If it does, there won't be a better card in 2015. So if 187 stays intact, will there be a better? Probably not. False. Or there won't be a better card, so true. Jones never fights at heavyweight. False. Weidman never fights at light heavyweight. False. 187 does better pay-per-view numbers than 182. False. Without Edgar Faber, that fight night card would be the worst in UFC history. Probably true. Bellator will one day have a man versus woman fight. Come on, please be serious. There will be no dominant force at welterweight for the next 4 years. I don't know if 4 years is the case, but probably for a year or two at least. Great question. One I've been talking about as well. I was watching some older fights on Fight Pass and noticed Eddie Bravo had his own scorecard for the fight. That's true. Much like boxing. Where has that gone? Seems like a decent idea since Joe or Goldie usually say we're talking and stuff, can't really judge the fight accurately. And if you watch Bellator, Jimmy Smith always gives his scorecard during the fights as well. And then someone notes, Rogan talked about this on Sunday night. I think he mentioned the issues with the NSAC. Apparently they didn't like someone doing a fight scorecard like that. Yes, which is true. And the commissions don't like anyone that makes their judges look bad, even when their judges deserve to look bad. You think Rumble versus Jones is going to be similar to Jones versus Rampage? In my opinion, Rumble's style reminds me a lot of Rampage Jackson. I think Jones will stop him in the 3rd or 4th round. By the way, which Bellator fight this Friday are you most excited to see? Second part first. I am really kind of excited to see this Emmanuel Newton. Sorry, I got something in my eye. This Emmanuel Newton Liam McGeary fight. Look, I know Liam McGeary is called a prospect, but he's 32. But he doesn't have a lot of miles on him. He is really explosive. There's still a lot of questions about what he can and can't do in terms of, I think, the grappling and the clinch department. But at range, old boy will light you on fire. So I want to see exactly what the limits of his game are, and I want to see I want to see what Newton can do to push that. Shout outs to the Co-Main Event podcast, because they talked about how Newton was like this guy that not only like no one expected to do as well as he's done, but like certainly Bellator, either the old regime or the current one, hadn't expected to do well. And has sort of just found a way to have success, and is a weird, quirky guy, and all of that working together is kind of awesome. So I think Newton has done more to endear himself to fans than he has ever in his career, and during his title run, however much that may be. And McGeary is an interesting challenge. McGeary has an interesting upside if he can get past Newton. So that really is kind of an important fight to watch. Obviously, King Mo versus Chet Congo is kind of fun in the fun way that things can be. But that main event at Bellator is kind of fun. I mean, definitely and important, I would argue as well. I don't agree that Rumble it has the same style as Rampage. First of all, I think Rumble, by the time Rampage fought Jones, he was noticeably slower, and his game had been much more conventional. If anything, I think you might think that there's a narrowing of Johnson's game, but I would argue that there's not. I would argue that it's what I would call a efficient streamlining of it. And I don't think he throws the same kind of power punches. A Rampage throws hooks. He doesn't throw a lot of overhands. Johnson is partly able to close distance because I think he's more explosive than Rampage was in that fight. I think he is certainly just naturally faster. And I think that on top of that, we'll see with the takedown defense, because I think, again, punching your way into the clinch is how you get him to the ground. It's how everyone is taking him to the ground. Shooting on his hips is no good. But they score differently. I think Johnson's quicker, but I also think Rampage is more your uppercut hook guy. I think that Johnson is more your jab overhand guy. True, false. The title changes hands at UFC 184, and Kat Zingano will walk away with the title. I don't think so, but I'd love to see it. But I don't think so. So the title changes hands at 185, and Dos Anjos wears the gold. Absolutely not. The title changes hands at UFC 186, and Barao gets his title back. Probably not. 2 titles change hands at 187, and Johnson KOs Jones, and Vitor defeats Weidman. No, false. The title changes hands at 189, and McGregor brings the pot of gold back to Ireland. I don't think so, but stranger things have happened. Faber beats Frankie by decision. Don't think so. Luke Thomas and Joe Rogan face each other at Metamora 6. Joe would have his way with me. So no. I'm not going to consent to anything where I knew I'd get my ass whipped. Production changes to UFC. The UFC's production values have steadily changed and increased over the years. However, I can't help but feel they're in need of a shakeup. The camera angles often cut off the lower half of the bodies, making it seem like a game rather than a fight, whereas in Pride, every fighter looked like a giant. I know this is due to restrictions of camera placement of the octagon versus the ring, but I feel like they could do better. With Bellator now upping their production, on what production changes would you like to see the UFC? You know what I would love to see? I think, first of all, it's a great question. Now, someone says the white canvas. I have wondered about the white canvas Pride used. Let me tell you what, listen, I love Pride, you love Pride. Here's what I have been told by production experts about that white, was that they can't understand why the Japanese used it, because they believe that the white mat is reflective to the point where it impacts the ability to show the fighters on the mat. It just doesn't work for live TV. It's way too bright and too disruptive to the overall picture. I trust them. I don't know how Pride got away with it, but I trust them. So I've asked about that white mat specifically. That's what I've been told. I think they have, to your point, updated the graphic packages. For example, I like how they shine lights on, like Strikeforce style, on just the 2 guys for the main event when they're in the cage, or the 2 ladies, whatever the case may be. But to your point, there's not enough. They don't play around as much as I would like. I like the slow motion cam they show, punches and stuff landing after the fact, like what's called the ghost cam, things like that. But for folks who have asked about the ref cam, I would like to see that come back. Maybe the athletic commission's not a big fan of it, but I certainly am. And I think more to the point, one thing that they don't really do that I would like to see them do is they don't have a camera they can lower into the cage. They have one, like the fisheye lens at the bottom that they used from Bellator, and have the guys posted around. I would like to see a camera on a hook that they can lower inside the cage and move at a certain angle. And you couldn't use it all the time. You would have to be very, very judicious and careful about it. But if guys are locked against the fence in a takedown battle, have someone lower that camera in and be able to move around. Like the NFL has a little more leeway, obviously, but they're constantly playing with the hooks and line system that they have for all the cameras, behind the line of scrimmage and like in the huddle, and then wide panning out and then zooming in behind a running back, trying to go through the A block or the A gap, excuse me. All kinds of weird stuff like that. There's definitely room for bringing us inside the octagon, finding a way to do that. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's an obvious challenge. So that's one thing I would really like to see. Let's get cameras in that octagon. Let's figure out a way to do that. I know it's not easy. It's not always going to be possible, but we really got to try here, I do believe. Future of MMA, where do you see the sport in the next 5 to 10 years? What will be its popularity at the time? I mean, this is a monster question. It's way too long of a question for this one. Where will its popularity be at the time? I have no idea. What styles or techniques will be discovered and implemented to further fight IQ and overall in-cage performance? I mean, this is literally like you could write a white paper on this. Aldo versus McGregor. Whose fighting style gains more from the bout being contested in the UFC octagon as opposed to a boxing ring? Aldo, probably. McGregor's going to be stalking, I suspect. And it's going to be Aldo punching or kicking and then getting out of the way. And because he doesn't have to deal with this and can deal with that, he's going to have more angles to do it. Is heavyweight in as poor of a state as it looks? Yes. Kane will beat Verdum, and then what's left? Nobody wants to see him fight JDS again, so where does the division go from there? Seems to have a lack of depth. In ball sports, y'all. I forget his name. Who was the guy at the combine who just jumped 12 feet 3 inches, setting a record? All right. I mean, you look at this guy. He is built like Hercules. That's where your athletes are for heavyweight. They're just not in combat sports. Not much anyway. End of Ronda's reign, best for UFC women's MMA. Luke, recently Holly Holm stated the best thing for women's MMA would be for Ronda to lose. Do you agree with that? It's not that we need Ronda to lose as such, like losing to Sarah Kaufman in a way that would make, or not Sarah Kaufman, Alexis Davis in a way that made Rousey look, somehow impotent in some way. I think that would have been bad for women's MMA. But having Rousey be tested, having Rousey have a real rival, having someone out there or several someones out there who you believe could legitimately test her and push her to further heights of greatness or take the mantle, yes, that would be beneficial. So it's not losing as such. It could be losing, but it's more about, is there someone out there? Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's like the Mike Tyson show. Like, let's see what happens when we throw this poodle in this tank with 2 great white sharks. You're like, oh my God, this poodle doesn't stand a chance. So it's a little bit of that, but that gets old after a little while, I feel like, or it might anyway. I think the next level is there somebody out there that can really give this woman a run? And if there is, wow, let's see it. Because I mean, listen, in the end, I thought Jones won pretty handily against Cormier, but part of what made that what it was yes, the brawl. I mean, a huge part of it was the brawl, no denying it, but it was also 1 versus 2, and it was also at least the idea, however misplaced, but the interest heading into the fight was partly a function of the idea that Cormier might be able to beat this guy. Hey, this might be the guy. And so you kind of need that in a Jones fight because he's going to bring his A game. You need someone that's going to make them bring their A game and then see how that matches up with the challenger's A game. And that's how everyone slowly gets elevated a little bit. And can you talk about the latest BJJ Scout video that breaks down Ronda's varied moves? I will just post it here because BJJ Scout can do a better job explaining himself than I can, or herself, whoever it is. Feel better, James Glory, by the way. Good question. Why is UFC 187 so stacked? Great question. First of all, let's read. I want to read the fight card. The fight card is nuts. Okay, here's the fight card as such. I'm going to read from bottom to top. John Dodson versus Zach Makovsky. Sick fight. Islam Makhachev versus Leo Kuntz. All right, whatever. Although I'm told that Makhachev is a big prospect. Joseph Benavidez versus John Moraga. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Travis Brown versus Andrei Arlovsky. It's a good fight for both guys. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Donald Cerrone. I mean, as Jeremy Botter would say, if your pants are on for that one, I don't know what you're doing. Chris Weidman versus Vitor Belfort. And then John Jones versus Anthony Johnson. Like, they could literally just have, if that was just the card and the rest of the card was, you know, I don't even know, butterbean shadow boxing, I'd still pay every dime I could for that card. It's insane. But the question is, okay, why is it like that? Good point. So a couple of people have said, well, what's about Pacquiao and Mayweather? It could be. And then some other people say, well, how did they know when Pacquiao Mayweather was going to get made and blah, blah, blah. This is a very easy one to predict. First of all, the first May weekend is a big weekend in boxing. Obviously, it's close to Cinco de Mayo, but historically has been a big weekend for Mayweather as well. Beyond that, there have been talks for a long time about that being the day if this fight was ever materialized. So they knew well in advance to not put a fight, even if they didn't know about Pacquiao Mayweather, they just knew that's a big card in boxing. Mayweather's going to probably try to get on it, maybe with a rematch with Cotto. Maybe Pacquiao ends up with Amir Khan, something like that. They just knew to just avoid it, right? And they probably had talks with people at the MGM or Mandalay Bay about what they were hearing and what was expected, and they just avoided it. And it was the correct call. So that's part of it. One, two. Another decent theory is, look, with the steroid issue or the PED issue anyway, with the injury issue, you got to be careful out there, you know. And that's going to be after all that testing starts, I believe. So no, not quite. Well, what day is it? I can't remember. No, this is in May, so that's not part of it yet. But nevertheless, there will be some measure of out-of-competition testing for that, and there will be, of course, the still injury rate of incidents that we still experience that has to be overcome or at least dealt with in the short run. So that could be a decent theory as well. But I also think there's a little something more going on. I think they are treating these pay-per-view cards this year with a renewed purpose. Although UFC 184 was damaged for all kinds of reasons. We lost the Vitor Weidman fight, which was moved to the 187 card, and other fights fell out as well. But if you look at what they're attempting on pay-per-view, 182, 183, 184 now, and I haven't seen what's 185. I don't think it's that great, but I don't think it's that bad. Can't keep these all straight, son. 185 is good too, right? 2 title fights on that, plus Hendricks versus Brown, plus Nelson versus Overing, plus Carriazo versus Henry Cejudo. Yeah, dude, that's a sick card too. Not as good as the other one, but it's pretty good. So I think there's a renewed purpose about pay-per-view. And it maybe is to hedge all the things that I mentioned before about injuries and PEDs, and maybe it is to help compete with Pacquiao. But I also feel like, you know, to me, it's not a coincidence that we're not going to get the first Fight Pass card that's exclusive to Fight Pass until March? I mean, that doesn't seem a little odd to you? I feel like they're definitely saying, okay, look, has pay-per-view declined for everybody, not just UFC, but boxing and everyone else? Sure. I mean, look, WWE is basically out of the pay-per-view game for all intents and purposes, right? And boxing, there's, you know, Mayweather and Pacquiao will set all kinds of records, but generally speaking, pay-per-view is down for everybody. It's not the same kind of medium it once was. But the truth of the matter is this, and I think if anything showed that, it was January. Forget all the bad stuff that happened in January. Let's just focus on all the good stuff. The 2 pay-per-views, strong buy rates, the great ratings on Fox Sports 1, the great ratings on Fox. When the UFC puts their best foot forward, the market responds. And pay-per-view may not be what it once was, but if you put your best foot forward on there, you get a little bit of luck with injuries and no one popping for, you know, whatever the case may be, there's still a lot of money to be made there. Still a lot of money to be made there. If you give people a great pay-per-view product, may not be what it once was, but it's still pretty damn good. I think that, to me, is the major takeaway from this renewed push in 2015. Ronda versus Cyborg, if it ever happened, 2 wins. As I said it before, I'll say it again, depends entirely on what weight. Although at this point, look, if this had happened a year or 2 ago, I'd say Cyborg. But the longer that Rousey has a chance to improve, I'm going to say Rousey. Head movement. You mentioned on the Monday Morning Analyst the lack of head movement from fighters recently. Why do you think this is? Do you think MMA is so diverse that head movement is just too far down the list for fighters to train? Someone takes my thunder here and says traditional Muay Thai. 100% correct. I think it could be because most people base the first striking as traditional Muay Thai. Slipping punches is not a big part of defense. Absolutely. There's not a ton of head movement in Muay Thai for all kinds of different reasons, but it just doesn't exist. And if you go to gym after gym after gym, what do you see as classes? Oh, here's Muay Thai at noon. Here's Muay Thai at 6:30. And there's many benefits to Muay Thai. You know, MMA has learned a lot because of Muay Thai. The leg kicking, a one among many other examples that, you know, maybe Western kickboxing doesn't employ. But it's still, every style has a certain amount of limitations. And so I think when Conor McGregor talks about movement and the uniqueness of movement, I don't know that he's talking about head movement necessarily, although that's probably a part of it, but it's just having a more free-flowing style and not saying, I'm going to commit to these principles that only apply to this kind of competition. I'm going to do some other things that make much more sense for this kind of competition while borrowing from here what might actually work. So yeah, traditional Muay Thai does not put a premium or a great emphasis on head movement. And I think that's where a huge portion of guys' striking style comes from. And I think that needs to change. I don't think you have to give up Muay Thai, but my God, like I mentioned on Monday Morning Analyst, for the next month, and forget just UFC, check it out on Bellator too. Look at how little head movement is a premium in MMA, and look how many guys get caught as a consequence. It is an epidemic. It is an epidemic. I made a big to-do and a big stink about guys trying to take other people down against the cage and whether that juice is worth the squeeze. I don't know if that's even as big a problem as head movement. It is insane. And you'll see guys parry jabs. You see a lot of that, you know. You don't see guys slip a lot. And I mentioned them before. If you guys didn't see it, get it online. Check out Josh Neer from Glory. Josh Neer's head movement is nasty. Really good head movement. He gets caught too. You know, you're gonna get hit, but when he gets it right, because the head movement is what? It's defensive, it's slipping, and it's defensive and throwing at the same time. Great head movement. How do you feel about this matchup with Mitch Clark in terms of the Michael Chiesa one? I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on him as a lightweight, as lightweight is stacked. It seems like Iaquinta is getting a bigger push, even though, in my opinion, Chiesa has been more impressive in the UFC and wouldn't likely beat Iaquinta again. Excuse me, and would likely beat Iaquinta again. A fight between Barboza and Chiesa would be interesting. How far do you think Chiesa is able to go in the lightweight division? I agree that he's probably, I wouldn't call him criminally underrated, but I would acknowledge that I don't think he gets quite the due that he's supposed to. But recall what happened in his last fight. I think that's probably where he is. Even though he had been doing pretty well, the Joe Lozon loss, which happened in September, I think set him back a little bit. And so he needs to get back on the winning track. And by the way, he's going to fight UFC Fight Night 63, which I have applied to go to. I think Michael Chiesa, if nothing else, is an action fighter. And Mitch Clark, having beat Iaquinta, however, how do you want to say it? You know, whether he could beat him 9 out of 10 times, I don't know. But he did beat him. He's on a run. So it's a question of, let's see how fluky the win over Iaquinta was. And let's see how fluky the loss to Joe Lozon was. And let's put two guys, let's see where they actually kind of are. Because I think there's a hunch that against the kind of pressuring offense that Chiesa gives, Clark might have some issues. But maybe Clark is much savvier than we're giving him credit. I actually kind of like the fight. Why does Roy Nelson spell heavyweight as HWY? I don't know. Ask him. Okay, does Silva's fight night failure for Joe Standalone change the optics of the situation for you? It remains true that the only time Silva was randomly tested out of competition, he failed. But he also failed fight night tests for the first time ever over his long career. While any commentary on what he has taken in the past is straight speculation, does the fact that he would have failed regardless of the additional tests change the way you view the situation? Also, does the addition of anti-anxiety and sleep aids change the optics? I talked about this before. I think my general take is that if you want to have suspicion about the rest of his career, I think it's allowed if ultimately inconclusive. But to your point, there does appear to be a particularity about this situation with the amount that was in his system and the uniqueness of things, the anti-anxiety pills, for example, that were found that make this situation maybe also unique. But maybe this is a step up from the previous things, not necessarily a complete aberration. And so once you pop, you open that door to maybe it is breathless and unfair and wild speculation, but you have you lit the match. Like where the fire goes from there is sort of out of your control. Okay, Mayweather versus Pacquiao business plan. Luke, would you please explain the business model of Mayweather fights? Who are all the parties to the negotiation? So it would be the two networks. And basically the fighters, and then as it relates to the promotional entities, so Golden Boy, Top Rank, Mayweather Promotions. I don't think Pacquiao has his own, so it would be those parties, and also, of course, where the event is held. What exactly does the $200 million figure represent? So 120 for Mayweather, 80 for Pacquiao. These are their guaranteed monies. So the guaranteed money is what they're going to make no matter what. So you know how an MMA guys have money to show, money to win. And some guys like Melendez just have show money and it's all right there, all in one go. It's like that, only instead of $120,000 or whatever it is for Melendez, it's now $120 million and $80 million. That is not the sum total of what they're going to get. There's going to be a pay-per-view split as well. Those details have not been made privy. It'll probably follow along the same 60-40 split, maybe even more for Mayweather's favor. I don't really know. So recall that when Mayweather fought Alvarez, I attended that fight, by the way. I interviewed both those guys. The base pay for Mayweather was roughly 40. After pay-per-view, it was assumed he took in roughly 70. Okay, how much that will increase as it relates to Pacquiao and the pay-per-view buys after the fact, we don't know yet. But I would expect that Mayweather will probably get upwards of 150 to 180 million, and Pacquiao will certainly cross that $100 million mark as well. But who owns the rights to the pay-per-view? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I think both will probably own the rights to at least the footage of that. But I have to double check. Who sets the price for the tickets? Well, this is going to be largely a casino issue. So the average ticket price, I think, is going to be something like they want to get 40 million out of 16,000 seats at the MGM Grand. So you have to do the math. I'm told that less than 1,000 tickets. I think I've read, maybe I should say I'm told. I've read that less than 1,000 tickets are even going to be put up for public consumption. The cheapest of which will be 1,000. I think the average ticket price, is going to be $5,000. I mean, just do the math. How you get 40 million out of 16,000. Again, recall Mayweather Alvarez set the record for Gates in Nevada at 20 million, but that wasn't just for fights. That was for anything, concerts, Cirque du Soleil, whatever. In Nevada history, Mayweather Alvarez at 20 million. They want to double that. They want to double that. Okay, and this is when people are like non-event IMO. It's like 9/11 non-event IMO. Okay. How exactly are the fighters paid? So this is different. Mayweather has interesting contracts. So why is the fight taking place at MGM Grand? Well, Mayweather has a deal with MGM Grand that all of his fights are going to take place. They're at least up for a certain amount anyway. So they couldn't have the fight anywhere else. And like when Mayweather fought Canelo, it was crazy. Like, yes, there was a lot of Canelo advertising all around the hotel and stuff like that. But you could tell that was Mayweather's building. I mean, it was pretty clear. Just from like all the signage and everything else. So he's probably going to get money from them. Mayweather, like when you go, again, I don't know how it's going to work for this one because a lot of these contract details have not been shared. But for example, like in previous Mayweather bouts, if you went and bought, a hot dog and a beer, he got a cut of that. He got a cut of concessions. He got a cut of merchandise. He got a cut of the gate. He got a cut of pay-per-view. Like he got a cut of closed circuit. How that's going to work this time, I don't know. But Mayweather might have the most lucrative contract in like all of sports, just in terms of how many pieces of the pie he digs his hand into. So he has a really nice contract. How much of that will be affected against Pacquiao, I don't know. By the way, I also read that there was a proposed, or it was reported that if someone fails a drug test, they're going to use USADA, by the way. If there's a failed drug test, there was a $5 million penalty. There is no penalty. That was an incorrect report. All right. Do you think Zingano will last more than one round against Rousey? Man, this is like, I said it on 120 Sports, and I really think it's true. This fight is kind of hard to figure out because it's either going to be exactly what you think, or it's going to be one of the craziest upsets ever, and not because of the odds exactly. Look, everyone has talked about this, and there's no way to deny it. Against Nunes, against Tate, Kat Zingano just doesn't find herself until the middle of the second round, and then really the third round. Rousey comes out like a bat out of hell, you know, like a house on fire, and not in a reckless way, but in a sustained aggression kind of way. And so the question is this: what do you believe? Do you believe that's a bad matchup because of that fact? Because one person just surrenders so much to the other person that you have this elite finisher who starts strong versus this person who finishes strong but in much later rounds, that gives up positioning, that doesn't seem to be mentally focused, that all kinds of problems about Kat Zingano early? Or do you say, well, okay, all those things are true, but you're missing the larger picture here? The larger picture is, look at the survival instincts of Kat Zingano. Yes, she's put in bad spots, but they can't get rid of her. And what happens when they don't? She comes back and barnstorms them. You know, look, here's what I would say. A worse ref would have stopped, or I wouldn't say would have. A worse ref could have stopped that Nunes versus Zingano fight. Not saying it should have been stopped. I don't think it should have been. But I'm saying there are some refs with some bad trigger fingers that could have done it. And that would have been like the worst stoppage I've ever seen. I've definitely seen worse. Not advocating for it. I'm just saying it could have happened. Because she was getting beat up in that one. And in the Tate fight, she just couldn't seem to get any offensive rhythm going until much later. And I just don't know how that's going to work against someone like Rousey. But you could say, look, you can put her in all kinds of peril, but if you can't finish her, she only gets stronger. I don't think it's the worst argument in the world. It's not the one I favor. But, you know, listen, after 10 upsets, and everyone's like, Luke, you took a bath on your predictions. Yeah, everybody took a bath on their predictions. Some worse than others, but everyone took a bath. But the point being is, if you have a card, you have 10 upsets, like just a week ago, this sport is crazy. I only do predictions because, like, it's a fun thing to do. And even when you're wrong, like I was wrong about the Barboza-Johnson fight, but I was kind of right about how it was going to look. I think it's fun to, like, try and figure out what it might be. And it's cool when you're right. It sucks when you're wrong, but whatever. It's the game. But just the certainty that some fans have about outcomes in the sport. And I mentioned this before, the only fight I've ever been truly certain about was Mendez versus McKenzie, because I just thought that we're talking about two different kinds of people here. And again, there could have been an uppercut on that one too, you know. Daniel Lefevre is living proof, I suppose, but you get the idea. All right, let's go to the Twitter machine here because I've kind of ignored it a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't have. Is Jessica Rakoczy at 1-4 the worst fighter to appear in the UFC? Maybe. What about setting a lower limit of water percentage in athletes' bodies at weigh-ins? It's easier to measure. The hydration issue has to be measured not just at weigh-ins, but at all along the weight cutting process. So no, I'm not sure that's the best idea, although it's not the worst idea either. Was impressed with the Tom Duquesnoy fight, but I think against a high-level wrestler, he may struggle. Not ready for UFC yet. Not quite ready for UFC yet, but you want to talk about a kid who is light on his feet? I mentioned him in the Monday Morning Analyst. Go check him out from Bama 18, this kid, Tom Duquesnoy. Woo! I mean, looks like you have to nail his feet to the ground to leave him there. Otherwise, he's going to float away. Light on his feet, man. UFC 187, better than UFC 100 on paper. I don't know. Pretty close. I'd say UFC 100 was a little bit bigger because you just can't imagine how much bigger Brock was than everything else. But 187 is a decent attempt. Stipe Miocic versus Mark Hunt. Is Miocic too athletic in every aspect of MMA for Mark Hunt? I don't think athleticism is the issue here. I would set that up to, I think Mark Hunt is pretty agile for a big guy. I think that he still has his power, his trademark power. His wrestling takedown defense is great. I just think that the persistent kind of offense he provides, plus his chin of I mean, Miocic's offense is more conventional, but it's really consistent. And so as a consequence, I think it's a bit of a bad matchup. Plus, he has big power too. Let's see. With Mayweather versus Pacquiao set, could we see Yodsanklai versus Buakaw or Rousey versus Cyborg? Here's what I'd say. Look, there is no equivalent to May versus Pac, and everyone's trying to say, well, it doesn't matter, different business models. It all matters. Just accept that there's nothing equivalent. But it's okay. It doesn't have to be. There might be someday, just not right now. But I do think it's going to put pressure on promoters to, like, when promoters see what like that did, on the one hand, they'll be like, well, I could never do that. But I think, the UFC might look at that and be like, man, we want a taste of that. Look at what that was like. Let's see how close we can get. And right now, I don't think they can get that close, but at least they can deliver bigger premium fights that will be better than, or, well, let's just plug holes and then fill a pay-per-view, Who do you like in the Ryan Ford Yushin Okami bout? Okami. Releasing footage was Neer's mistake. Hickson versus Anjo. How do you do it with different era? More respect? Yeah, they never released the footage. I wonder what people would say if they saw Hickson beating up on Anjo, because I'm told it's a brutal beatdown. Have you seen Anjo's face afterwards? It's a disaster. So there's that as well. Let's keep going here. In your opinion, does Neer's heckler's tenacity and brashness affect any of the perceived offense? Well, it has nothing to do with whether he went too far physically, but it certainly makes any kind of sympathetic gesture to him a little bit slower among people, whether you or me or anyone else, because he just seemed so intent on inviting it. You know what I mean? Like, he went out of his way. Like, this heckler said things that not even Neer's professional opponents do, and they're much more skilled than the heckler. You know what I mean? There was such a level of disregard for even his own safety, and any kind of any notion of recognition of Neer's ability, that on the one hand you're like, well, the guy's so clueless, you should avoid it. Maybe he should have. On the other hand, it's like, I mean, you did everything possible to invite harm upon yourself. Like, why are you surprised you succeeded? Let's see. Let's go back to the questions. Roy McDonald, in past live chat, you discussed the BJJ scout breakdown of Roy's effectiveness and strategic thwarting of Tyron Woodley's offense. Rory has stated that he doesn't watch tape of his opponents and does not formulate a game plan around them. Do you think Roy is just saying this? Is Faraz doing all this for him, or do you believe him? I know for a fact Faraz watches a ton of tape, and so I suspect that some of that bleeds into how they prepare. PEDs and grappling. Does IBJJF or ADCC test for PEDs? So they have started on occasion to use USADA, but it's very intermittent and in no way comprehensive. I know that for IBJJF. I don't think ADCC uses anything. Do you think they should, considering BJJ is built on the idea that technique beats strength and size? The answer is yes. Obviously, we want to see clean sports, but I don't like, the first major problem I would have with IBJJF is that these guys don't pay the athletes. Like, more than anything else, that needs to change. And once we get that in place, we can start worrying about the different levels of architecture that you need for a comprehensive testing policy. But for me, there's like so many other glaring issues. Plus, like, I have to say, I mean, some people are really upset about the way in which people use in grappling. Some people are totally at ease with it, much more so than in MMA. Seven Brazilian fighters lost in Brazil on UFC Fight Night 61. Is the end of the world nigh? No, but it's funny to me. Like, yes, some of those Brazilians lost, but I've never heard a crowd cheer for the guys who beat the Brazilian more than I did that Porto Alegre crowd. They seem to be like, well, if you're going to beat William Patalina, I might as well do it with a Superman punch that caught us all by surprise, right? What would you say? What would you say? I don't know what this person is asking. Oh, what fight would you look at these guys and say they were past their peak? Silva, for certainly, I would say the Weidman fight. GSP, I would say the Diaz fight. Maybe even the Shields fight. Really. BJ Penn, Fitch, Shogun. Maybe. I don't know, the Hendo fight, the first one, Frank Mir. I don't know, Nick Diaz. I don't know about Nick Diaz either. Frank Mir, maybe the second Lesnar fight, and then Nick Diaz. I don't know. Maybe Daly. I don't know. I don't know. No, because he's looking against Penn. So maybe the Penn fight. I'm not sure about it. Diaz is a little harder to figure out because he just takes so much time off. It's not, you don't get a clear sense of who he is and where he's at. Stacked UFC card. This year the UFC is stacking cards with 2 title fights. Blah 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 blah. Do you think that will lead to weak cards for the fight nights and other events? I certainly hope so. I think that fundamentally we have way too many fights and way too many events. It's nearly 600 fighters on roster, way more NBA players than there are in the NBA. For a sport that's much more globalized, yeah, I am all too happy to have there be a market correction about what kind of schedule there is. Sure, fine. Like, I don't know about you guys. Like, on the one hand, for me, part of watching fights is I don't care if the rest of the world is there. I truly don't. I like just watching on my own. I love that. Another part of watching fights is that if they're big fights, there's nothing more fun than having a galvanizing effect around them. There's nothing more fun than, like, when fights are big fights, it's fun to talk about them. It's fun to think about them. It's fun to go places and people are wondering about it. You know, that's kind of awesome. That's kind of how it was in that period between the beginning of the Ultimate Fighter and the Brock Lesnar era, you know. Not all the time, of course, and, you know, it's been that way a little bit since then, but I missed it for a while, to be perfectly honest. And it's so much more fun when everyone is invested. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Pay-per-view buys for 184. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know. Do you anticipate the buy rate to match or even surpass what it would have done with Weidman Belfort on the card? No. It certainly won't surpass, and I don't think it would match either. She's carrying it by herself. Rousey's popularity is weird. She's the most visible person in some ways, but it doesn't 100%, although obviously it translates some. I mean, she is a successful person. It doesn't quite have the same commercial transactional effect. So that one's a little hard to figure out. We need to wait and see. I mean, the you know, she's in swimsuits and she's on Conan. She has such a reach that no one else has. But commercially, it's not exactly clear if her novelty is that, or if that novelty can then force people to open their wallets. We just haven't quite figured that out yet. You know, listen, her first one was great, and she's, you know, had this ability to be on other cards where, let me look up her thing, her resume, real quick. Like, her beef with Ariane Celeste is like the weirdest thing ever. Maybe I'm alone in feeling that way, but it's like, why do y'all care about the other person? All right. So Carmouche, she headlined. 168, she's part of someone else. 170, I believe she headlined. Who else was on that 170 card? Hang on one second. Yeah, and then Cormier ain't coming. So that card had been devastated by injuries, did not do that well. And then 175 had Weidman Machida on it. So it's not exactly clear. It's not exactly clear just yet. We'll have to see. All right. Convince me I should actually spend $60 on this card. Entirely up to you, my friend. What would be your game plan for Zingano to win the fight? Oof. Jabbing, cutting angles, and clinch breaking. Dave Camarillo made a point about the way to beat Rousey is to beat her in the clinch, but I think that you have to. I don't think that's wrong, but I don't think you attempt to do it early unless you really have the skills for it. And I don't think that Zingano has the skills for it. I would argue that the game plan is just chop her down and stay out of the way and clinch, break, and move. And even if you lose the round, that's fine. But as the rounds wear on a little bit, then you slowly open your offense. But I would be very defensive early. Not so defensive that you're not moving or counterattacking, but have a limited idea of what to do. Because if you just don't have the skills to match her in the ways in which she's going to lock up with you, you know, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball. The trick is to avoid positions where she has like huge advantages. Huge advantages. Jab, cut angles, clinch break, and move. Leg kick, jab, cut angles, leg kick, and move. Then by the third round, begin to open up a little bit more. Can Holm get a title shot immediately if she beats Pennington? Let's see how she looks first. How about Cyborg passing her drug test? I was really wondering about that one. Yeah, you know, listen, if she's clean, great. Let's see how she looks against Charmaine Sweet. I think she's going to beat the hell out of Sweet personally, but yeah, good. That means, listen, she's doing at least some of the things she needs to do to give the UFC confidence to sign her, and that's important. I remember Dana White at the Baltimore event. I was there for the scrum, was saying, like, you know, you guys are all about us about drug testing this and drug testing that, and you want us to sign Cyborg. She could be a potential nightmare for us. I didn't think that was a bad point. I thought that was a pretty fair point, actually. So now that she's doing some of these things, they at least have some idea of how to stay clean. No out-of-state testing for UFC 185. Is this a potential for disaster? And the fighters get a free pass on this one. I'm assuming the UFC is going to probably do something to randomly test them out of competition, but maybe not. Maybe they get a free pass because Texas is a show. But it's also not just about Texas. Like, this shows that you know, the UFC trying to have these additional punishments, and they can't use the commission authority to do it, but only up to a certain point, or use the commission authority to test up to a certain point, and they want to go beyond that to have this elevated standard. Well, the elevated standard, they don't have the contractual ability to do it as it currently states, so now they have to usurp some of that from the fighters, and you know, it's a little problematic for me. Next for Frank Mir, Mitrione or Rothwell? I would say either of those are probably fine. When is Coker and Bellator going to test their fighters? It's not like they can afford it. It's not like they can't afford it, at least to make them look halfway clean, test main card fighters. I would say at least test main event fighters, not about the whole thing. So, like, again, I made this argument before. It's not that the Viacom doesn't have money. It's that they're trying to get Bellator to operate on an independent budget to be financially solvent. And doing the same kind of testing UFC does would damage that, certainly. So, you know, again, it's like not every MMA organization can be expected to test the way the UFC does. The reason why UFC has so much pressure is, one, because they have such a hold on the industry, but two, they have the money. Like, they just have the ability to do it what other organizations don't. Now, the Viacom backing would allow that, certainly. But what I will say is this: like, I've definitely liked the direction. There's no doubt about it. I love the direction Scott Coker is taking Bellator. I think these tentpole events, as they get more and more a leading role in the Bellator product, will be great for the sport as they sign free agents and that sort of thing, and build a kind of roster that can deliver for the Spike TV audiences. But at the same time, I really have found his answers about, well, we sort of defer to athletic commissions and what they may or may not do. And some of them, the Mohegan Sun or whatever, they might do more themselves, but this answer of I'm deferring to commissions, I don't really think that washes anymore. And I think there should be more pressure on Scott Coker to answer for that, to be quite honest. I like the guy. I think he's a good promoter. I think he's a smart businessman. I like what he's doing over there. But that answer about, well, you know, we'll follow the commissions, nah, it doesn't really work anymore. We clearly know that's not enough. There's no doubt about it. Those out of competition random tests have made the argument that we defer to commissions totally untenable. Interesting question. Would you rather a fighter caught on PEDs get a 2-year suspension or a 4? 2. I think 4 is just outrageous. But at the same time, this is my whole issue with the UFC about what they want to do. Look, I think they take anti-doping seriously. I think if you look at that commission or presser that they had. Those are some serious steps that they want to take to rid doping from the sport. And I think that if they aren't able to somehow find a way to do it, it'll have a strong effect towards that end. But I don't want laws being changed for the UFC's benefit that affect the entire industry. I think it is really, 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 really bad that you could potentially have a law change that says the first offense for a performance-enhancing drug, which would include diuretics, will result in a 2-year ban. I mean, I don't think a 19-year-old or 20-year-old kid fighting on a Tough Enough or whatever kind of regional MMA show in a state who needed a diuretic to make weight and maybe made a bad decision should be banned 2 years from the sport. That to me seems like a very bad idea. The UFC, if they want to ban their guys 2 years, then they should find a way to do that. But I don't want laws changed that affect every level of the industry, because the realities are the various levels of the industry are so far apart they barely look like one another sometimes. Quickly. All right, do you think there'll be a finish in any of these fights? Pettis, Dos Anjos? Yes. Jones versus Johnson? Yes. Hendricks versus Brown? No. Aldo versus McGregor? Probably not. Lawler McDonald? Probably not. Dodson versus McCoskey? Yes. And lastly, 3 favorite beers. Of course, Arrogant Bastard Ale, Bell's Two-Hearted Ale, and just for a crisp Pilsner and Eggenberg. All right, so we have to get out of here. You can email me at luke.thomas@sbnation.com. I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/LukeTSports, and of course on Twitter @SBN Luke Thomas. Tons of coverage coming your way for Invicta. We're going to have people there at the open workouts. For Bellator, we're going to have Chuck Mindenhall there. Saturday, the whole crew is in LA, so lots of coverage coming your way for MMAfighting.com. Stick around. And until next time, stay frosty.